Amen.
Okay, Andrea, take it away, if you would, please.
Okay. So this is from my daily devotional that I was given by my cohort. So I'm just going to read it. Trust me and don't be afraid, for I am your strength and song. Think what it means to have me as your strength. I spoke the universe into existence. My power is absolutely unlimited. Human weakness consecrated to me is like a magnet drawing my power into your neediness. However, fear can block the flow of my strength into you. Instead of trying to fight your fears, concentrate on trusting me. When you relate to me in confident trust, there is no limit to how much I can strengthen you. Remember that I am your song. I want you to share my joy. Living in conscious awareness of my presence, rejoice as we journey together toward heaven. Join me in singing my song. And that was from Isaiah 12:2-3 and Psalm 21:6.
Excellent. Good, thank you. What a great devotion. Where did you get that book?
So my cohort got it for me for my birthday.
Great cohort you have.
I do. And they got me a really beautiful Bible as well.
Very nice. Okay. Well, we want to talk a little bit tonight. We'll have a little time before we close to get into a little bit more about Philemon and a little bit more about what's going on week to week. I do want to take a little time in a bit to go over one of the assignments we did last week, week 4, and that was the assignment on one great person. I would like to hear a little bit of feedback of how that went and how your interviews went, and maybe what you discovered, or maybe in the context of hearing from others, we might get a little bigger picture of that. But before we go there, and then we'll move into a little bit of week 5. But before we go there, I do want to start off with this. This is kind of a key piece when we get to this point in the class, is to talk a little bit about worth and status, how those two words, how they are similar, how they are dissimilar, and especially when it comes to understanding the perspective of the New Testament writers about what it means to be a person of status, or how that affects an individual's worth. Sometimes we kind of blend them together, and we do that, for example, when we say, hey, somebody, a member of a team, or a person within a company, or within a family structure, that there are some people who are more important, okay? The president of the company might be more important than the custodian, you might say. Now, they may each have different roles, and those roles may be important, but if you're weighing them out, you would say one is worth more than the other. Perhaps the star of the basketball team, LeBron James, for example. Any basketball fans here? Fantastic. We got one. Yes, thank you, Andrea. So LeBron James. Oh, what's your team? You're not a LeBronie. Okay.
No, I'm actually a Kings fan, and nobody likes them. So
nobody likes the Kings. I can't really use my analogy with the Kings. There's nobody very good on the Kings. So okay. Well, how about this? I'll go with this. How about is Steph Curry worth more to the Warriors than I don't know, that rookie, that Nico kid, whatever his name is. Okay. Steph Curry makes $40 million a year to play for the Warriors. He scores lots of points and makes TV commercials. Nico probably makes some little minimum piddly, like $1 million a year. Gosh, why couldn't we have been basketball players, huh? So you could look at their salaries, and you could say one has more worth because he gets paid more. You could look at their role on the team. One is the star and the leader of the team, and the other is a rookie, a newcomer, and has a very limited role of leadership on the team. And you could say because of that position on the team, Steph Curry has more worth. But the question is that really a fair comment? I mean, do people really have a different worth? I think when we look at New Testament concepts of this, because every group, there's going to be different people who play different roles, and they may have a different status. And that's the word that we're going to be using here to differentiate when someone has more clout, more importance, perhaps a higher level of respect. These would be words that we would refer to as status. But the New Testament is very clear. In fact, if we had more time, if we were face to face, we would do a little bit of time exploring this. But the New Testament is very clear when it comes to worth. From a biblical perspective, maybe this is different than how the world sees it, but from a biblical perspective, the idea of worth is that each and every person has an intrinsic value, a worthiness that is rooted in a couple of things. First, in that in the fact that we're human, because each and every one of us as humans have been created in the image of God. That goes back into Genesis 1. And if we move through the Bible, we see that because each and every one of us are human, and we touch on verses like John 3:16, which reminds us that God so loved the world, not just some of the world, not just parts of the world, or not just, some individuals within the world, but all of the world. And so there is a sense of a worth that we all have based on God's creation and based on God's stamp, his image, but also based on his love for each and every one of us. And no matter how good we may try to be, God doesn't love us more, or God doesn't look at us as being more worth than anybody else. So worth becomes kind of a constant. And that becomes part of our struggle when we begin to move into other things. Now, you may have used those words in a similar way, or maybe you've thought that. Sometimes we talk about worth, and this is going to bleed into a little bit into the greatest assignment as well. What makes a person great? Often people would say, well, that person, because they're influential, so they are worth more, or they have a larger bank account, they have worth more. Or maybe they have the ability to do things better, so they become worth more. But again, from a biblical perspective, when we talk about worth, it is rooted in God's view of us. But still, status is an important piece. So, for example, in our Philemon, we've got the Apostle Paul, who, Andrea, he is the Steph Curry of the New Testament, okay? Okay.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. And then we have, because he is influential, he is, he wrote half the New Testament. He was the early church leader, the founder of many, many churches. He was the key missionary in spreading the good news about Jesus in the first days of the early church. And so probably nobody more influential than him. And with that influence comes something called status. We would look at some other individuals, maybe in the story of Philemon, and we'll pick Onesimus next. Onesimus is like that rookie on the Warriors, that Nico Mannion. Who the heck? In fact, I'm going to guess that probably none of you have ever heard of him. And I only know him because I'm a nerd and I follow things like basketball. Okay. So because he's not famous, he's not noteworthy, he hasn't had all-star games or all-star appearances. He is a member of the team, and that says it. To be a member of an NBA team, that really says something. But he is not, if you were going to rank the team in which one was most important to the team's success, you would have Steph Curry at the top, and that would be his status. You'd have Nico Mannion probably at the bottom, and that would be his status. Now, they're both team members, so their roles are different, but they would have different status. So when we talk about Philemon, he would be the Nico Mannion of this conversation. He would be the person that nobody's ever heard of, that when it comes to the context of the early church, he's never even been a part of the church before. has been up to this point an outsider, though now we see that he has become an insider. So he is part of the team, but his status is quite different. And we could ask the question, where would Philemon fall in on this continuum of status? Anybody? Philemon, more status than Steph Curry? I mean, Apostle Paul. Less status than Paul? More status than Onesimus? Less status than Onesimus? How would you rank them when it comes to status in the early church?
I think that it seems like he had, just from what I've read, it seems like Philemon has more status because Paul is talking to isn't Paul talking to Philemon?
Yes, he is.
So he's talking to Philemon on behalf of someone else, correct? On behalf of Onesimus. Yes. So he's asking him to like give him great, right? Am I going the wrong way with this? He's asking him
you're
to
absolutely right.
Have grace upon him. And so I feel like, I don't know that Philemon has more than Paul, but Paul, he definitely is talking to him like an equal, like a friend, like an equal.
Okay, good. And
that's
you know
what I get from it.
I appreciate that, Andrea. I think that's a good take, and that shows me that you're just simply looking at what's in the text, which is exactly what I want you to do. Because yes, I would argue that Paul has more status than Philemon, but he doesn't use it as a club to beat Philemon up, does he?
No, he uses it as like, I'm your friend, I'm asking you to do this for me. That's what I took from it.
Okay, good. Terry.
And I know there was one part that I read, Paul telling him that he owes him, so he could use it, that kind of to get him to do what he wants to, but he doesn't want to do that and trust that he will make the right decision.
Right. Yeah, good. Anybody else want to jump in on the status thing?
Come on, Don. I know you know.
Yeah, we missed you last week, Don. You got some catching up to do.
Okay, what was the word that we used?
Status or worth. And I'm going to say let's avoid worth right now, because we could say, well, in the scope of the early church, Paul was certainly worth more because Paul did all these things and Philemon did nothing, right. At least so far. But let's avoid the use of the word worth, and let's talk about status.
Yeah, I would definitely say that Paul has much more or greater status than, how do you pronounce his name? Philemon?
Philemon. Mm-hmm.
Philemon. I would say it would be Paul, Philemon, and then Mr. O, the big O.
Yeah, the big O. Yeah, that's right.
I pronounce that name. Onesimus or Onesimus. I don't know.
Go Onesimus.
Onesimus. Okay.
There you go. Or the big O. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when Terry and I talk about it, he's just the big O.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. Yeah. I think there is, and then even between Philemon and Onesimus, when we try to separate those two out, where do the status lines most likely run there?
Well, one is like Philemon is a master, an owner of the Big O. So it's kind of, first of all, I hate slavery. So I have a really difficult time talking about it, especially in biblical times, because God did create all men in his image. So I have a hard time with people owning other people. But with that said, just seeing that Onesimus, is that how you say his name? Onesimus?
I say Onesimus.
Onesimus.
Mm-hmm.
Are we supposed to go out of the chapter? Okay, go get one. Out of the chapter and like start reading commentaries and stuff like that?
Not
Is it-
necessarily. Like I say, you can stick to doing exactly what Andrea did a little bit ago. That's a good example of saying, I know when we were discussing Paul, I know I should say Paul has more status, but the way he presents himself, he doesn't lord it over.
Yeah, he doesn't
Uh,
want to.
And so that's part of this story too. And I think you can read, it probably wouldn't hurt to, in your red Bible, to read the little page background on Philemon, but I wouldn't spend too much time doing outside commentaries or other people's rooting around. You can we can root around kind of on our own and just look and see what is there. But I want to affirm you though, Don, that is the challenge, isn't it? The challenge of slavery, and that is a key piece of this whole puzzle. And yeah, and you raise a good question. How can we be? I know I'm getting out of order here. I'm getting more into Philemon rather than taking my time to work through Worth a little bit. But how can one person own another person? If they're equals, if we're equal in the sight of God, if we're all loved the same, if there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free. I mean, Paul teaches this. This is Paul's one of the hallmarks of his teaching in the New Testament, is this sense of equal value, equal worth, in which does really do some elevating some people whose status would have said they weren't, didn't have much status. And actually, I shouldn't say, I will say Paul, but he's following a good example. Jesus was probably the best at turning things upside down and elevating those who the world would have said they had no status. And yet he said, but no, in the kingdom of God, we're gonna really focus on an individual's worth and not be so divisive and so structured by people's thinking that some people have greater value. So Jesus started off, Paul followed it up, and again famously said things like, yeah, neither Gentile nor Jew, neither male nor female, neither slave nor free, but we're all part of the same kingdom family. And so that, that context, how does that rub what Paul says in this letter? Or how does that help inform us? Because one of the challenges of interpreting a letter is we don't have all the backstory, and we don't have all of the context, cultural context, or what's been said before. We don't have any of that. And so we have to kind of rely a little bit on what we do know from outside this specific letter, and maybe some other pieces of what Jesus said or what Paul had said earlier in other parts of the New Testament. That can be helpful. But okay, let's go to Worth. So if there's an owner-slave arrangement here in the status, if what Paul says in other places that we are all equal, how does that affect Philemon and Onesimus in their new relationship? How does Worth factor in?
I think that the way Paul's explaining it, he is explaining it through a spiritual awakening, saying that. So stop it, please. So I don't know. I call him Philemon because I don't know how to pronounce his name either. But
I'll just keep saying Philemon. You can say whatever you want as long as you spell it right in your paper. I'm not going to knock you down for pronunciation if I can't read it. So if I can't hear it.
Okay, so I know that he's a Christian.
Onesimus or Philemon, which one are you referring to?
Philemon.
Yes.
Philemon. I know that he's a Christian because it talks about in this book about him having his own church.
Right.
Yes.
Right. The very beginning, first couple of lines, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. And so I also believe that now that Paul is saying that his slave is now his brother in Christ, I believe that's what creates them to be equal. I mean, I know that God creating them in the image of his image made them equal from the very beginning, or gave them, what was the word that you used? Let me look at my notes real quick. Intrinsic value.
Yeah.
And that gives them worth because they're both human beings. And now we're going from them being created in God's image to now they're spiritually reborn. And I think that makes their worth equal as well.
Yeah, and that's Paul's main point. He doesn't go back to creation. I did tonight, and because I think it's a bigger argument than what we see in Philemon. But clearly, and nice catch, clearly, Paul is rooting his argument for equality based in their shared connection, their brotherhood, because they are both sons of God. They're both in the family of God. They're both believers in Jesus. So yes, that's a good catch. There's an equality rooted right there.
I think that would be challenging now, because how can he go back as a slave knowing that he's a born again believer?
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so if I put myself in his position, say that I've got Terry working for me and I'm a slave owner, she runs off because the way she's being mistreated. And so that's what I'm assuming has happened, just from what I know from history. And so she runs into you, and you lead her to the Lord, and now she and I are equal in the eyes of the spirit realm. How do I allow her to come back to work for me and make her go back to, working back in the fields or digging ditches to build fences for me, or whatever it is that they've got them doing? How do I know that she's born again, bought with the blood of Christ, and here she is, my sister in Christ, but hey, get back out in the fields and do your job. And by the way, I'll be out there to beat you,
Yeah.
at the end of the day.
Yeah, and that becomes again part of this backdrop that we can't fully see, but that is the context, what's going on, isn't it? That Philemon owns Onesimus. Onesimus is returning. And so what is Philemon to do? In a normal situation, when a runaway slave would be returned, probably that slave would be punished, possibly killed brutally as a reminder to everyone else in the community who is both slave or slave owner, that that's what happens to runaway slaves. So it's really pretty daring that Paul would even write a letter, and probably sends the letter with Onesimus carrying it. Can you imagine? Can you imagine being Onesimus, bearing this letter, know what Paul says? Paul says, okay, you need to go back to your owner, because he's a friend of mine. Not only is he a friend of mine, but he's also a brother in Christ, just like you are. And Onesimus is probably saying, why don't you send me somewhere else? Can't I just go off somewhere else and we'll just forget that whole chapter? I'm born again. I'm in Jesus now. My past doesn't matter. Can we just move forward? And Paul says, no, I think you need to go back. And wow, what a, put yourself in Onesimus' shoes. He's probably saying, I want to trust you, Paul, but man, that's a big ask. And so he gets to walk back home carrying this letter. Probably people are seeing him walking back into town. They're saying, ooh, what's going to happen? And Paul says, Philemon, read this letter in front of you and all the church. Your brother Onesimus is like a son to me. Oh, your slave Onesimus, the useless one, is like a son to me, and he's like a brother to you. So that becomes kind of it's pretty charged. Again, it's an interesting letter, I think, for all those dynamics. What do we do with this whole broken relationship thing? What do we do with this whole slave owner, slave holder, slavery? How do you, as a Christian who believes in the equality of humanity, how do you own slaves?
That was my next question.
Yeah, well, that's a good, interesting question. And Paul doesn't deal with that directly. Maybe he never dealt with it, or maybe he did. Maybe this was part of that when he says, I expect that you will do even more than I ask. Because he doesn't come out and full on ask it, does he? But he knows that Philemon is going to do even more. So what is that even more that he's talking about? It's an interesting letter, and there's a lot going on. And but again, status and worth play into it quite a bit, because we see that Paul is calling for a leveling of the field, but at the same time, he is also recognizing there is position in our society, there is status in our society. Philemon is a man of influence. Philemon is a man who is a leader in the church. Philemon is probably the most wealthy man in the community, and probably the community leader in the town of Colossae where he lives. And yet, so he's still recognizing that status, doesn't ignore that, and doesn't say status doesn't matter anymore. But he is also, part of his argument is focused on our equal worth. So interesting.
It'd be safe to say, I mean, I'll wait till after this class is over, but or when we're done with this paper, but just to go back, because you just said something to me that I just learned, and that was that Philemon lives in Colossae.
Yes.
And if we read through the book of Colossians, those are letters, especially if he's a leader in the church or a leader in the community where Paul's writing, then he's not only getting this letter asking him to take his slave back, but take him back as a brother and help him to be free. But he's also writing those letters to that community that Philemon could possibly be the leader of.
Yeah.
And I find that very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm going to guarantee, Dawn, the next time that you read through the book of Colossians, you will read it with an eye for how does this fit? How does this fit?
Yeah.
It's not a direct connection, but you will see it. You'll get into about Colossians 3, Colossians 4, and you'll start seeing some things that say, I'm glad I read Philemon, because I'm starting to see a little bit of connection here.
Yeah. Well, I think it's right around 3:10, 3:11, somewhere around there, where he tells them about not living the way they used to, and you know, to not be angry and not to have strife, but then he starts talking about the expectations that, you know, Christ has for us as Christians, how to live, you know, to even watch not to let any foul language come out of our mouth. I mean, it's just, I just think it's really interesting.
Yeah, no, it is. So I'll look forward to how that all plays in. There's a couple things before you go, Peter. Hold on to your thought. I'm gonna say, in this book, Keller, it does talk quite a few times about like when it's going over the Torah and some of the early, like in Deuteronomy and such, and how to treat slaves in the Old Testament, and even having to do with Jubilee. I think that was in Grassi. Talking about every 7 years, slaves were, debt slaves were released from their debt, and all debts were released. That's a different animal. The slavery you read about in the old part of the Old Testament, where some Jews would then, be in a debt slavery relationship until the Jubilee year came. Quite different than the slavery in the Roman Empire, which is what we're dealing with here in Philemon. This was a, and which in and of itself was probably quite different than the type of slavery that we're most accustomed to from our history here in the United States, because slavery in the Roman Empire probably wasn't quite as racially charged. But as we did say a while ago, probably was still pretty demeaning to not be fully human, or not be seen as fully human, but being somehow less than. And they and this is just a little aside, and there's no way of proving it, but I've been told that the name Onesimus, I know it's hard to say, Dawn, but the name Onesimus was rather a common name amongst slaves, because what often owners of slaves in those days would do is they would kind of erase the individual's name and give him a name of their choosing. and Onesimus, because it means useful, was a kind of a common name that an owner would give to his new slave in hopes that that slave would be deemed useful. And so it may not be that. He may have been, his mom may have named him that at birth, but it wouldn't be too surprising historically that this was his second name, the name that he came to be known by. But again, his real identity was kind of hidden under this image of being a slave, and so he bore a new name. So, which is kind of interesting all of itself. Anyway, Pia, you had a question, and I want to give you an opportunity.
It's kind of like it's interesting because I read a couple of the verse and the books, but it talked about like different letter he wrote.
Mm-hmm.
It says that Paul, and this one seems like Paul is a peacemaker, make peace with people, or kind of the middle, do it right for the human rights. And then Philemon is, in this case, he's like a very wealthy Christian or a community leader. I'm curious, how do these gonna change in terms of status and in terms of like the ending story?
Yeah.
Who will have who do people will believe? Like a peacemaker or people who have power? Like, I'm wealthy, this is my city, this is how I make the rule, which is like a bishop of a house church. How do this thing gonna end? It's kind of like do the story continue, or do we have to kind of guess what's happening at the end?
Yeah, you have to guess. Unfortunately, there are some clues, and again, I would not to worry about it. But if you do read through the book of Colossians, it will give you a little hint that things worked out well. The other thing is that if it didn't work out, say that Philemon got this letter, tore it up, and crucified Onesimus, this letter probably doesn't survive and become part of our biblical record. Because remember, Paul didn't send a copy to Philemon and one to the person collecting these letters to be part of the Bible. He sent a letter to Philemon, and it just happened to be to have survived and has become part of our record. So it makes you think that probably Philemon did what Paul asked him. And again, it is a personal letter, right? It's from Paul to Philemon.
Yeah.
But again, notice how Paul sets it up. He doesn't set it up to be a letter that only Philemon reads. It is to Apphia, and it's to Archippus, and it's to all of the church who are going to be reading this. And so there's a couple of things going on with that, isn't there? That this isn't just something that Philemon can ignore, and he can't blow it off, and can't say, well, that's Paul, but why should I listen to Paul? Well, if he doesn't, how's that going to look in the midst of the community who reveres Paul as their teacher? So it's an interesting use, or it's an interesting way of using his influence. And but we don't have, I wish there was Philemon Part 2 that was written from Philemon, 10 years down the road. Dear Paul, I'm so glad you sent Philemon back to me, or Onesimus back to me. He is the best. You're right. You wouldn't believe what he and I are doing. We're going on campaigns to win our neighboring communities to Christ now. Who knows what he might have said, or Philemon too. Paul, go jump in a lake, and you can tell me about spiritual things, but I'm a businessman. Let me run my business as I want to. We don't know how it played, but I've got a hunch it probably played well. So,
Yeah, I just wonder. It's I kind of curious.
Mhm.
Who like we're talking about winning, right? I want to see who will win at the end of the race. I mean, like who will come out. Like people will like them or say that okay, this is what we want.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but again, that's part of, and again, I think what makes this letter so interesting. It is the way Paul sets up this question, puts it out there for everyone to see how Philemon is going to respond. You know, even that's a good question. Is he doing this as a way of peer pressure? You know, putting pressure on Philemon to make sure he does the right thing. Some have argued that he is not doing that to pressure Philemon, but because he knows Philemon is a stand-up guy. And so by giving Philemon the stage here and asking everyone to look at Philemon, he allows Philemon to be a role model for everybody else. So I don't know. You have to kind of wrestle with that. Which is it for you? Is he twisting his arm, or is he giving him a larger platform from which to be an influencer for change in his culture? It's kind of an interesting, again, hard for us to know exactly, but those are some ways we can interpret it. Okay, well, let's put Philemon aside just for a little bit, and I do want to talk about your assignment, the one great person assignment. I'd love to hear a little bit about some of the names that got lifted up, and then maybe some of the reasons, and if you saw anything. You know, was it different for people who were of different age groups or different nationalities, different religious backgrounds? Because we didn't ask the question in a religious way, but it can still have, you know, people can still, because of their own value system, they can have some religious connotations to how they answer the question. How did folk answer for you guys?
I noticed, I think it was like the age, I don't know, like 45-ish and up. I think that's where 3 of my answers of Jesus and God came from.
Okay.
So I thought that was interesting that, you know, I think maybe it was like 50s and 60s actually, that they were answering that instead of, you know, like someone that is popular on TV or, you know, something else, compared to some of the answers that I younger people.
Okay, well, stick with it, Shanna, because we'll come around and we'll ask if others found that same thing. But some of the younger folk that you talked to, because it sounds like you talked to other younger people, who were some of the other people that did get lifted, the non-Jesus / God answers?
So, well, I asked my daughter and she said me.
How old is she?
She's 8.
8. Well, that's the perfect answer. Yes, I would agree with her. Way to go, Mom.
And she's the first one I asked, so she started it off pretty good.
I hope you rewarded her that one.
Yeah.
Because she won't always say that, Shanna. Okay, the teenage years are coming.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And then I got one of them was Elon Musk for like his technological innovations or something like that.
Elon Musk. Yeah, he's in the eyes of the world. Yeah, he is an influencer now, isn't he? All of his technology and such. Yeah.
Yeah. One of them I got was Oprah.
Huh.
I think also because she was just on.
She was. Yeah, with the interview. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't think of the other ones.
Okay,
right now.
Good. Well, that's interesting. And so I'm going to guess that your Elon Musk and Oprah people were more in the middle crowd, not
middle
kids, but not the older adults either. Okay. Anyone else get an answer that Shanna was the greatest?
Most of the people that I asked, most of the people that I talked to, all chose family members. I had one person that said Martin Luther King Jr., and that's because she's 17 years old, getting ready to graduate high school, and that's what she's currently learning about.
Sure.
And so that was like the influence of her, I believe. The other one, and I can't remember because I talked to a lot of people, and so I had like 15 of them, and I narrowed them down to 10. And then Ben Carson was my mother-in-law, and she was influenced by that because she had just got done reading his book and watching the movie Gifted Hands. And so, and she had done both of those within the last like 3 or 4 weeks. And so that was her influence. And then everybody else was like my grandma, my mom, and it was all different age groups too, that chose family members. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I only had one person, and she's a fellow Jesus freak. And of course, she gave me this big, long statement about how Jesus is her Lord and Savior. She'd been washed in his blood, and she went on. And I was like, just needed a short answer.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
And after I got her answer, I went, I'm not asking no more church people.
No, that's right. That's right. Because yeah, they had that Sunday school answer down pat. That's right. Yeah.
Everybody gave me the same answer. So, so I did different age groups. I did my niece, of course, she said my sister, her grandma. And then I asked my daughter, and like Shanda's daughter, she just thinks I'm the greatest person in the world.
Oh, yay. And how old is she?
She's 28.
Wow. You must be great.
I must be.
You must be, because yeah, I mean, because if it's rough when you've got teenagers, it's even rougher when they become adults on their own. So
yeah. Well, she depends a lot on us. So mom's the ATM lately. So
yeah, well, you're clearly doing good work. Okay, great, Dawn. Thank you. Okay, anybody else? In fact, everybody else. Go ahead, Terry.
One of the ones that, or he was the youngest one, was 6, and he said Abraham Lincoln.
All right. Yeah, he remembers Abraham Lincoln, huh?
He remembered Abraham Lincoln, yes. I got a lot of middle, 26, 25-year-olds. One said that their great person was their daughter, their 6-month-old daughter.
Okay.
And because she helped this person discover a part of them that he didn't know he had.
Fair enough.
And I was like, oh, I would never have thought about a baby being the great person. And one of the 2 of them actually didn't give me a specific name, but they really made me think. And I was like, wow. I have them right here. One of them, let's see, I think a great person is within everyone. A great person can have all aspects in life: compassion, giving, sincerity, non-judgmental, and a value for all lives, whether, and let's see, but it takes living through life to become a great person, but it's in everybody. So they didn't have just one, one specific name. And then are
they trying to get extra credit? That's a really well thought out answer.
It really made me, it was like, wow, blew me away. And then this other one, again, not a specific person. It says, or they said one made, let me see. If someone, okay, does this person does not believe in great people because everyone is flawed and makes mistakes. If someone made another feel important for a day, helped them where they wanted to go, let's see, and then say they made a big mistake tomorrow, but are they still great? And I was like, oh my gosh, where did you get, where'd these come from? So the people just really you know, it's like God opened my eyes to these people. I was like, wow, I would not have expected this type of answer.
That's great. Okay, good. Andrea or Pia, either one, jump in.
Yes, I can share mine. Yeah, mine is I just question it out. I say name a great person. Give me a great person of yours, and then why. And my style is I printed out a paper, so I cut them out in the middle. I just give it to them. So the Wednesday, because my daughter had two friends come visit her, and plus my boy, they're like 13, 14, 15, 16. So I get the 4, and then the next group is like my co-worker. So I also get them like 3 of them, and they're about the same age. They're like 25, 26, 25, and that's another middle group. I call those a middle group. And I also have one that I interview when I go to these family get together in Fresno. These are like the older folks. They come, they talk about life, they have kids, grandkids, things like that. They were like 40. The youngest one is like 42, and they were like 42 to like 50 something. And so when I just pass them out, and when I get the result together and I sort it out and I read it, it seems like I having a pattern. It's a pattern. Like those 4 teens, majority of them say, 2 of them say mom, the mother, and 2 others say their brother and sister. So pretty much those younger age, they're more into like family type thing. My family is the hero and the great person, all those. And then my middle group, which is the group that they're in college, they have a job, they're either single or they're not married yet. The 4 I interviewed, none of them married. There's 25, 26, and another 25. And this group is the group that says something about different thing. It said something about movie star. I don't even know those movie star name. A guy that who teach him how to get out of debt, and I think it's David, something, get out of debt and how to save. And this guy, the 26 or 27, this guy say that Joe Biden, because of the stimulus check. So they give me a name that it's out of the family now, out of the family. It's nothing to do with the family. Like superstar, something admire them, something they want to be, they want to pursue when they grow up in the age. And then my older folks, like that I go do the family thing with them, they had like 5 of them, and they all say that they're very specific now. No, nothing about kids. They talk about their parents. They talk about like my mom, my dad, and one who said that my mom is always be my best and forever. And so they talk a lot about family, and I say why, and pretty much 2 of them say that the reason that they love their mom and dad because they're old, and they know that the time they spend together is not much together. They don't have that much time to live with them, so they want to spend a lot of time, the most time that they can with their parents. So when I summarize the whole thing, yeah, as a writing, as a thing makes sense. When you're small and your vision is very small, all you see is just family influence you. Of course, it's family. But when you go in college, you step out of the house and you see people with different education, different style, and they brain got bigger and they're smarter, and all those they admire is not family no more. They see different. But when they get old and they come back to the house, they have their own kids. And then and they want the kids to love them, how appreciated they are. Then now it makes them appreciate for the older, like the mom and dad, and grandma and grandpa, those type of things. So I think it's been, and I talk to them none about religion, not a Bible classes, nothing. I just say, just give me a name and why.
Yeah.
And so most of them will come out like that in the summary.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'll look forward to your paper, Pia, because you saw it really clearly. And I'm not saying everyone's going to see the same thing, but that's interesting. You saw the transitions there with the different ages. So who are some of the other celebrities that they picked out? That in between group, that 20 something, 30 something group.
Yeah, that 20, 24, 25, 26, and 25. That group.
Okay.
And the
So we had Joe Biden. Yeah, Joe Biden, and then other people.
Yeah, I like the Joe Biden. That's the one that is 30, 38 or 39.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the Joe Biden. He's kind of off the thing about Joe Biden because he talked about the stimulus. I think he got his stimulus that time when I asked the question.
He probably got it that day, and so he was very thankful to have the pocket full of cash, and so he said Joe Biden. Yeah, so interesting, very good. Okay, Andrea, how about you? What kind of responses did you get, and did you see anything similar like what Pia said, where you saw kind of or actually a couple have said that they saw some changes depending on the age of the group?
So it was interesting to me because like the ranges in my ages weren't great. They weren't that great. I did 12 people. The ages ranged from about 36 to 60. And then the younger was 25 to down as far as 9. The 40s to 60s, one of them said Keanu Reeves, but she had like legitimate reasons behind it. She said
Really?
She just really respects him.
Okay.
He's very down to earth. He gives so much of what he has to the homeless. I didn't know a lot about him, other than I knew she liked him, but I didn't know why. Like I always thought it was just because he was cute.
Yeah, sure.
But he does his own, he's very humble, he's down to earth, he does his own stunts. He gives back to the community, so she appreciates that. Like I've never done that much research about him.
Mm-hmm.
Another friend said, so she's 44. Another friend said Jim Carrey, because he struggled with mental illness his whole life and he's overcame it. So she was she thought he was great because of that. She didn't let it, control his life. One of my friends, who she's 60, she said her daughter, she's the strongest woman I know, and she's overcome adversity, any adversity she's faced. I had one person say her mom, because she's always given like unconditional love and wisdom. And then my best friend said her pastor's wife. She's sweet, compassionate, a great sense of humor. She's very adventurous, and the advice she's given has always seen me through tough times. So the younger ones I asked were the ones that caught my attention. So I asked my friends. So my friend's daughter, who's 13, and she has been struggling. She's 13 and she's been struggling with her gender identity. And so right off the top of her head, she knew exactly who she was going to say, and it surprised me. But she had a really genuine reason for it. She said Demi Lovato, because she is very encouraging. She speaks her truth. She admits her flaws and her weaknesses. So I was like, that was a thoughtful response from a 13-year-old, And then my niece, she said, my grandma, because she loves me and she's helped me with distance learning. So I love that. I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, only in 2021 do we have that answer.
Right.
Or that rationale. I'm not saying grandma wouldn't have still gotten the prize, but yeah, helping with distance learning.
I thought that was really special because my friend, I don't think my stepmom really realizes like how much she's appreciative, but anyways. And then one of my friends said my grandpa, he's always been such a hard worker. He was a war veteran. He was an amazing father and grandfather. We always knew he loved us, though he wasn't affectionate. So that says a lot. Brene Brown. because she owns her own flaws and vulnerability, she always speaks on how she's a work in progress, and she's so encouraging and powerful. So, I mean, I think there was like thought to most of the answers that, that were given, and they were, I didn't mention the Bible class to anybody. I did have one of my guy friends say that when I asked him the question, I asked him the question just like everybody else. And he said, I don't really think anybody's great. Like, I don't look up to anybody. And I said, do you not admire anybody? And he goes, I never really had a role model to look up to. So I think I don't believe in someone being great. I think they have to earn that. And I was like, oh, okay. So, I mean, that was an honest answer, So.
You got some very honest answers. I think all of you did. Sounds like there's a lot of really, really thoughtful. And I think that's part of what you're hoping for, is you get some good, thoughtful answers. But again, what we're looking at is when people say, great, I'm really glad that, man, family sounds like, I'm just looking around the circle. There's a lot of family members who got to wear the prize of being great. That says something, because a lot of times it's more mixed with more of the celebrity type. And again, you see historical characters. And again, I know a number of you mentioned, whether it be Abraham Lincoln or Martin Luther King Jr., a lot of times because of where we're at in this time of year with school and hearing the stories of some of the people in history who've influenced, how our world is now. You'll get some responses like that. But again, it goes to the question of what does it mean to be great? And I think you probably see a lot of it, especially when it comes from family. It has to do with people who are willing to give of themselves for somebody else, or someone who is willing to fight through adversity to overcome things. And that's what I was hearing a lot of that in your responses too. But that's often what you hear, especially for family members. Excuse me, mom or grandpa or my husband or whatever. There's always going to be those who say it's because of their sacrificial nature, which is interesting because most people, if you were to ask them, give me the definition of greatness, they probably wouldn't identify humility or sacrificial as identifiers of greatness. But yet when they give you the name of somebody, oftentimes it is that. It's that, they're willing to give up something or do something, to benefit me. And I recognize that and I appreciate that. So it's kind of a cool thing. Yeah, and way to go. Shanna, I can see why your 8-year-old picked you, because I saw you interacting there with Don's grandson for a moment. You better keep an eye on them, Don.
Yeah, he was totally flirting with her.
Oh, he was. You can see he was a flirt, and he said, "I'm going to flirt with Shanna, and she's flirting with me. This is way cool." Yeah. It was awesome. Yeah, he got that big kiss. Yeah, that was sweet.
Oh my gosh, child. Oh.
Yeah, that was what a charmer.
Well, at least he knows a pretty girl when he sees one.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does. So good. Well, good. It sounds like this was a good assignment. I hope it was fun to talk to people. Last question about it. Did you do it? Were they personal interviews? Did you talk to people on the phone? Did you do it through sort of social media? How did you work out the interview?
Mine was both. Mine was personal, and some of them were texting.
Okay, good. All right, Terry.
Both personal and texting.
Okay, Andrea, how about you?
Can't hear you.
I sent out mass texts to like my friends.
Okay, perfect. I'm glad we waited for that. That was worth waiting for. Okay, Pia and then Shanna. The question was, how did you do your interviews? Was it personal? Directly personal, face-to-face, or was it through some other medium, via text or social media, or even over the phone?
The question, you mean the 10 question, right?
Yes, yeah, the 10
Oh.
people you spoke to.
Okay, those, I just, like I said, I print out in a paper form and I just give it to them. I just give it to them, pass out. I say, here's, I provide them with a pen and pencil. I said, when you're done, just give me back the paper. So I just give it out to them like that. So
Okay.
I stay there, but when they're done, they just give me the paper. So
Okay.
when I got home, that's what I see, the result.
How about you, Shannon?
Mine was mostly text, and then just a couple were in person.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad you guys got a little creative and got those all done. Okay, yeah, let's do a little, I'm going to do a little bit of just a little teaching here. When we look at the New Testament and we talk about greatness in the New Testament, Jesus spoke about greatness a number of times. Oftentimes, he would do it in a way that was very surprising. And again, especially when we think about things like status, that oftentimes when Jesus would elevate somebody, it was often elevating their status, someone who would be overlooked by the world, whether it be a widow or an orphan or a child or a woman, or a Samaritan woman, for example. When we see Jesus elevating people or recognizing them on par, it was quite shocking for his original audience. We've lost that sense of shock today because we live in a world, while it's still not perfect by a long way, is far more equitable than it was in Jesus' day. And so we're still a work in progress, but we often miss out when we see some of these interactions. We'll read stories about Jesus or hear his teaching, and we'll say, that's, yeah, of course, that's, of course, that makes perfect sense. But we don't realize oftentimes that it was shocking for the people who heard it at first, just because of the historical background that it was being moved into. I'm going to share real quick just a little thing on greatness, and it comes out of Matthew chapter 18. In fact, let me pull up slideshow. We'll do that from current. And talk just briefly about greatness, because in Matthew 18, this is an interesting passage. It's a whole chapter. It's kind of a discourse that Jesus teaches, and it starts off with a question directly about greatness. The question that Jesus asked, or Jesus was asked, was by his disciples, who want to know who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Now, again, I know we haven't gotten too much into this idea of kingdom of heaven, but if you recall from reading in Craybill, the idea of kingdom of heaven is a key feature of Jesus' teaching in Matthew. The idea is not about who is the greatest in heaven, but this was Matthew's way of referring to what Jesus talked about as the kingdom of God. And again, that's not a place, but it's where God's reign or God's rule is working itself out. And so when they ask who is the greatest, it's like saying, what is the most important thing, or the most important attribute, or the most important type of person from the perspective of the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven. And again, this would not be going to the question of worth, because we've already said that worth was kind of very even-handed when it came to Jesus' perspective. But it does have to do with status, and so I think they were probably hoping that Jesus. This is a guess, okay? I don't know this. I wasn't there. They were probably hoping that Jesus was going to come back and say, "Oh, the greatest in the kingdom of heaven are all you, my disciples, and I hope everyone remembers how great you guys are." But he didn't say that. No, instead, what did Jesus say? Well, in Matthew 18, the question was, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And this is what he said, or what he did, I should say, that he called a little child to him and placed the child among them. And he said, "Truly, I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Okay, I'm going to just give you a chance to wrestle with that. What is he saying? What attribute is Jesus getting after here as he's talking about greatness? And what is he lifting up? Because we don't get a chance to maybe ask a follow-up question. We only hear what he said. So if Jesus was one of your 10 and he points to a child and he says, the reason I consider them great in the kingdom perspective is what? What is he pointing at?
He's pointing at their innocence, their purity, their like they don't see things as people do. Like they don't see evil like we do. I think it's like their innocence.
Okay, good. I think that's good. I think we see Jesus does point that out a couple other places in a very similar way. Anyone else? Because Jesus takes a little different track here, because if you look at the text, just this particular text, you'll see that he's not really focusing on the innocence, although that's part of it. And you know, every child is that way. So maybe that's a sub point, but there's something else about this child.
I think that they see things like everyone's equal in their eyes. He doesn't see that he doesn't see that somebody has more or less. The child that's looking through like eyes, like innocent eyes, not necessarily innocent, but innocent eyes. They don't see status. They don't see someone that has money. They just, like, everything is so exciting to them. You know, they don't see sadness. They just, you know, whatever they have is what they have.
That's what, and again, that's what the kids are. And it's that part of that innocence, again, that they haven't quite learned yet. Maybe some of the things that we as adults get become part of who we are and how we see people and how we separate people. Okay, good. Anyone else? Just looking at the text here, verses 2 through 4. What's he focusing here on?
I know I've already spoken, but I just realized something that Andrea said. She's talking about the status of a child, and this is saying whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah, so he's really making this a status question, isn't he? Or elevating status, which is kind of a flipping on its head again. In the kingdom, you know, in the world, people of low position or low status are at the bottom of the barrel, aren't they? But in the kingdom perspective, Jesus says something about that is going to be kind of the opposite.
So, like, basically, I think what he's saying is that child has as much status as you do. Like, you, the man who has everything, that child who has nothing, and you need to be okay with having nothing, just like that child. Is that kind of what he's saying? Maybe.
Yes, I think so. I think so. Good catch, Andrea. Yeah, and you're right, and that's a nice catch, Don, too. That it is. He specifically points out that it is the position in the way society sees the child, because it's, you know, kids in Jesus' day were really not taken seriously. I mean, I'm sure their parents loved them, but in the eyes of the idea of a child's place is to be seen and not heard, or something like that, would probably be much more. You wouldn't take a child seriously. It would be, if a parent came, then yes, you would listen to the parent, but the child wouldn't have the status. And Jesus says there's something about that. So
this Professor John.
Yes.
This one it say truly. This the text. It said truly, I'll tell you, unless you change and become like a little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Does that mean that you, like, like everybody is doing bad thing, unless you change to be good, then you gotta go heaven? Is
okay.
that?
No, it's not quite there.
Nope. Okay.
And again, and let me tell you why, Pia. This is because Jesus used this phrase, the kingdom of heaven, but he wasn't talking about going to heaven. He's talking about actually to make a better example, he's talking about the priorities or the ways of heaven coming down to earth. And so it now becomes the kingdom of heaven here on earth. That so he's talking about when in the Gospel of Mark or the Gospel of Luke, you would hear him use the phrase the kingdom of God. But that wouldn't be how a Jewish person would have said it. And so in Matthew is probably actually more indicative of what Jesus would have said, that referred to it as kingdom of heaven, because it's saying that this is how God's rule or how God's influence begins to take root, begins to take place here on earth. And so when Jesus comes and he says, I'm announcing that the kingdom of heaven has drawn near, he's not saying that we're going to get to heaven soon. He's saying that God's influence here in our midst is right here around us. And
that's why when I read it, I had to read it 2 or 3 times, but I still don't get it, because these things is just hard.
That is a common, I'm going to say that is a common misunderstanding. And again, it's mostly because when we hear the word heaven, we think of only one thing. We think of the place we go when we die. If we get to go to heaven, that's great. But when Jesus is using this phrase, and he talks about it a lot in the Gospel of Matthew, if you have yet to have the BIB439 class, there's a lot about the kingdom of God in that class because we focus on the book of Matthew. But that's a key piece. But he says that if we still need to change, and the way we change is by, instead of playing the game to climb the ladder, which is kind of how the world operates, isn't it? We play the opposite game. We want to take the lowly position. We want to take the humble path. We want to be take the position, even if it means we're ignored or not considered as a child would be. That's our place, rather than trying to put ourselves out there, put ourselves forward, or put ourselves on top of the heap.
Is that why they say take the lowly position?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's saying that as a child takes that lowly position, if we want to be first in the kingdom, we're great in the kingdom, then we have to be humble in that lowly position, like a child would be considered in a lowly position.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So Jesus kind of turns it all upside down. Now I want to just for fun, because that's the end of that question and answer, maybe. But Jesus goes on throughout chapter 18, and he says a number of other things. And what makes it interesting to me, the question it raises to me is he still answering that question about who is great? Because he goes on a little later, verses 12 and 13, he says, what do you think? If a man owns 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go to look for the one who wandered off? And if he finds it, truly I tell you, he is happier about that one sheep than about the 99 who did not wander off. So the question is, if that's part of the answer as well, what does it mean to be great in the kingdom? And this is kind of an interesting one, but I think what he's saying is that it's the lost sheep. It is the ones who are maybe not seen or who have wandered off. Those are the ones who have some sort of priority when it comes to greatness in the kingdom. I know that's hard. It's kind of a little bit mind-boggling. Let me boggle a little more. There's 2 more that he does, and I know I'm getting all of my Bible nerdiness out tonight. But here a little bit later in chapter 18, he says this: if your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the 2 of you, and if they listen to you, you have won them over. But if they will not listen, he says, then take them and bring them before the church. And if they even don't listen to the church, then treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. Now, we have taken that verse, and often you say that's Jesus's teaching for how we should handle people in the church if they don't do what is right or if they break relationship. But I think it's just the opposite, actually. Because what do we see? When Jesus talked about how to treat pagans or tax collectors, how did he treat pagans and tax collectors? Anyone want to venture a guess? Did he ignore them or despise them or cast them out or send them away.
It was
With
fine.
love.
Yeah, he instead, he made time to go pursue them, even if it seemed to be scandalous to the religious authorities of his day. And yet that was kind of how he treated them. So when Jesus says, if they won't listen to you and they won't even listen to the church, then treat them as I would a pagan or a tax collector. And what did Jesus do?
Well,
He
it's
can-
pagan.
Yeah,
He ate-
pagan. Pagan is a word for a non-believer, someone who is
Okay.
outside the community of belief. So, and again, we see that Jesus would always do that, and he would always pursue them. And so we see those who go after and try to seek reconciliation are those that is a attribute of greatness in Jesus' mind. Okay, last one. Someone read this for me because I'm going to go and plug my computer in. This was the last piece of what Jesus said. He told a parable, and this also, I think, is part of the story. Someone read it for me as I plug my computer in. Go ahead.
For the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. I will pay back everything. The servant's master took pity on him and canceled the debt and let him go.
Okay. So this becomes part of the story. Now there's a lot more to the story. That's why all the little dots are thrown in here. So if we take this opening question of chapter 18 and apply it even here, maybe Jesus is still trying to say there's something of a kingdom priority here. This is a little bit of what greatness looks like from his perspective. What would we say in this parable, speaking about the king and the man who owed him money? What is the attribute that is lifted up here by Jesus?
Forgiveness.
Forgiveness. Absolutely. I mean, that's what the king does, doesn't he?
Mhm.
Now, if we were to read the whole story, if we went into Matthew 18 and looked at the whole story, we would see there's a second half to this parable, and that is that the man who has now received forgiveness chooses not to be forgiving, and then bad things happen to him. So again, it is all about this idea of something about being great in the kingdom of heaven maybe has to be with those who are forgiven, or perhaps maybe have been forgiven and now in turn choose to forgive others. That these become, again, attributes of greatness as Jesus lifts up these different ideas. But that's just one chapter. But I pick it because the chapter begins with that question: who is the greatest? And so if we want to know what Jesus thinks is great, I think it's a good chapter to begin to look and say, when we ask others, well, what is great? Maybe this is a time for us to say, this is what Jesus thinks of as greatness. So just some thoughts there about, beginning to try to distill into a 6-week course the entirety of the Bible. It's kind of hard, but there are some really key pieces when it comes to when we talk about greatness or status or worth. We really need to take into consideration, or at least make a priority, what Jesus said and what he thought about it all. So, okay, so for this week we continue on. We're getting ready to wrap up, but I do want to just have do a little bit here about the book of Acts. The book of Acts that you're going to be reading this week, or at least part of, is the ongoing story, and again, from a perspective of how the Bible has come together. We have those first 4 books of the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and those are all, we refer to those as the Gospels because they tell us the stories of what Jesus said and what Jesus did. And then the rest of the New Testament follows after it. But the rest of the New Testament begins with the book of Acts. And the book of Acts, again, written by the same author who wrote the book of Luke, tells the story as it continues on. Now, one of the things, actually, the chapter 6 in Fee and Stewart does a nice job of kind of talking about some of the challenges that we have when interpreting the book of Acts. And I want to point out one. In fact, it's on page 123, 124 in this book, because this becomes then the real question. Fee and Stewart refer to it as a hermeneutical question. And again, that's how do we interpret? How do we make it make sense? And the question that they raise, that I think is a good one, or how the biblical narrative in Acts is to be viewed. Is it, does it describe, okay, at the top of 124, does the book of Acts provide information? So it describes what the early church was like, or does it speak kind of as a blueprint of what the church is supposed to be like? So is it descriptive or is it proscriptive? That, you know, is it just telling us history of what happened in that first generation of the early church? Or is it a plan, a prescription for us that we can now follow and have it be kind of the blueprint for the church still today? And that's an interesting question, maybe a little bit of a challenge sometimes for us, but it does raise up that question. You know, when we see things happening in the book of Acts, should we continue to see them happening today? And if not, why not? Well, maybe it's because of what we're asking the book to mean for us, and how do we use it? How do we use the book of Acts properly? I know in our church right now, we've got an ongoing Bible study, and they're halfway through the book of Acts, and it's exciting and it's fun. But that really is the question. Is it just history? Or is it are there lessons there that help continue to inform us as the church moving forward? So as you read Fee and Stewart, just kind of wrestle with some of the questions that they raise. And as we look at the part of Acts that we look at, know that it's a unique piece. It's the only New Testament narrative that doesn't center around Jesus. So it's kind of we've had a lot of narrative in the Old Testament and a lot of narrative with the Gospels, but this is the only narrative that's New Testament, not specifically the life of Jesus. But that's where we're at now, and that's going to lead us to this early church, which is going to lead us to what does it mean for us to live in a present day church community, and so we'll leave it there. So any questions on tonight, or any questions about just things coming up in this next week?
Are we doing all, I think, 7 assignments, or are you changing anything, or?
My plan was to leave it as is, Terry, unless you can lobby me to pull something out. There's something that seems to really kind of hideous.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, the pictorial one, please.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was like, oh my God, we have to draw something? Are you kidding me?
No,
I draw figures. I mean, come on.
Well, fantastic. Then stick figures it is. I'm not grading you on artistic ability, okay?
It's awful, I'm telling you.
Just giving you a different way of expression here, Don, that's all. So let's go. Let's go.
What assignment is that?
Which number is that? That is, let me see, I have to go and look at that.
5, what?
Oh, it's not that one.
5.6.
5 point, yeah, that's it.
5.6?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
All right, yeah. So have a little fun with that, and you'll see. And you'll see that then 5.7 is the literary context of Philemon. So again, that's similar to the historical context. It asks you a different set of questions, quite a few more actually. It gets a little more elaborate. But again, just giving you a chance to really kind of dig in and root around in that book of Philemon and begin to ask some of those questions, or more of the questions we even talked about tonight. You know, some of those questions about why Paul asks in the way he does, you know, why does he choose the language that he does? Look at those questions about, what is the, how does he refer to Philemon? How does he refer to Onesimus? What does it mean by this language that he's making? Is it hierarchical language? Is he using his status as his power source, or is he using a completely different way of influencing? And so it becomes kind of interesting questions, though, as you look at the bring back, I went off my page, I lost you guys. As we look at his argument, and what is the argument? And again, that'll be part of what you wrestle with this week. What is a for this reason? I'm going to ask you to do this. And what is the extended reason? What is the, I expect that you'll do even more than I ask. What's going on here as Paul is weaving his request, and Philemon is going to have to come to some terms with. He's got to figure out what Paul is asking even before Paul arrives and stays in his guest house. Okay. All right.
I did 5.5 already. That one was fun. I actually like doing that one.
Good. And again, hit me on the number. That was 5.5?
5.5, yeah. That was the one where you have to watch the video of the overview of Acts 1 through 12.
Mm-hmm.
And read Acts 2, 41 through 47.
Yeah.
And then just answer those 4 questions. Actually, I like that one.
Good.
I like doing that stuff, not drawing pictures.
Yeah, and that's easier. And it helps that the videos are as good as they are, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I've been really impressed, actually, on the whole, with the because I don't go, most of these I don't go find. I do add some videos in, but a lot of the videos, this is just recommendation that comes from FPU, and I've been really impressed on the whole with a lot of the videos we've had to share. I think they do a really nice job of explaining things, especially the Bible, in ways that maybe we hadn't thought before. And it makes doing this thing online a whole lot easier. So, but yeah, that's more up your alley, Don. Fair enough. I'll take that into consideration when I see your stick figures.
Yeah. So what does the last week look like for us? Like, what does the signature paper look like? Are we just combining all of the Philemon papers?
You know what I'll do? I will post tonight a Word document on this week 5 that has the signature assignment on it, so you can see it a little bit ahead of time. That's one of the drawbacks to doing the online, is that you don't see anything until the week before, whereas maybe if we were in a face-to-face class, you would have already seen what the assignment exactly is. So I will do that. It is basically you giving your argument, what you think the book of Philemon is about, what's Paul trying to do, and then kind of looking at it through the historical world lens, literary world lens, contemporary world lens, to say what is the message, and going through and kind of pointing out, I think he's doing this because this is what he said in verse 12. When you can point to it, quote it, and build your case around what you believe Paul is after. Some people say, I think he's trying to just work interpersonal forgiveness into these two brothers who have an issue. Or you could say, I think he's trying to kind of subversively abolish slavery. In fact, the argument he's making says, how can anyone own slaves? And so you can go a lot of different ways. What do you think he's doing? And then just use some of the tools you've gained to explain and defend your position.
And then is that one also 700 to 750 words?
No, that will be like 5 or 6 pages. The signature assignment. But again, look for it. I will post it. I'll post it tonight, and I'll put it at the end of this week 5. So that's where you'll see it, and it'll be a Word document, so you can just pop it open.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for asking, because otherwise I might have forgotten. Then you wouldn't have got to see it until next week when it's, you know, due a week later. So that's not really very fair. Yeah, Terry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Don. Finish up.
I was gonna ask you, is there just as many assignments next week as there is this week? Plus on top of that, the signature paper?
No, you'll have a little bit less next week, and then you'll have the signature assignment, which is going to give you actually significantly less next week. And then, yeah, then the signature assignment, which we have a week, the week, and then 3 days. So yeah, it'll get us a little further out.
All right.
It'll be the Friday, 2 weeks from Friday.
Because you have 3 days after, right? The class ends to get it turned in. Okay.
Right. Actually, no, okay, class ends on that Sunday, so it would be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, it'd be that Wednesday,
Okay.
so 2 weeks from tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, Terry.
Well, that kind of goes over what I was wondering, because I saw there was some assignments in week 6. So it looks like a lot of it's due Easter Sunday.
Yeah, yeah, unfortunately, yeah, that would be the due date.
Okay.
I know. What kind of a Christian university makes things due on Easter Sunday?
And has no spring break.
And no spring break. I know. What's up with
Oh,
that?
man. That's true.
Everyone is talking to me about spring break, and I'm like, no spring break.
Yeah.
Yeah, no spring break.
Yeah, we don't get another week off until June.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because my
I know.
kids are coming from Pennsylvania, and I wanted to see, they're coming in October though. We're not gonna have a break in October.
No.
Something where they asked me and I say, I told them, what's spring break?
Yeah. What is that, huh?
Today they were talking about vacations at work, and I was like, they were like, oh, we want to know your like summer vacations. I was like, what vacation? I'm not
What vacation?
What does that word mean?
I said, let me tell you. I said, but let me tell you, in December, I'm getting on a plane somewhere.
It really doesn't matter where, but you're going. That's right.
I don't even have a plan. I'm going somewhere. I don't know where.
Good for you. Good for you. Okay, well, real good. Then I will see you guys next week, but I will
Okay.
post that signature assignment so you can see what's coming, and we will be really aware of that. So,
Okay.
okay.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
keep
you.
praying- Yeah, keep praying for
Bye.
Robin, and we'll look for her to be back next week too.
Cool.
Bye,
Good.
guys.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.